Dear students and history buffs, welcome to this lesson dedicated to one of the most dynamic and transformative periods in European history, the late Middle Ages. This fascinating period, which falls emblematically after the year 1000, marks a true rebirth. Together, we will explore its profound transformations which laid the foundations for modern Europe. The late Middle Ages represents a crucial historical period occurring immediately after the High Middle Ages and the year 1000. This period is characterized by a profound and systemic transformation of European society as a whole. The key and most obvious element of this change was a vigorous and unstoppable economic revival. This recovery was not an isolated phenomenon, but was accompanied by significant political and social changes that reshaped the face of the continent. The late Middle Ages emerges as a time of fervor, succeeding centuries of relative stagnation and hardship. A primary factor behind this recovery was the impressive population growth that affected the European continent. Population growth was not just a statistical fact, but a driving force. This demographic push significantly stimulated the development of new urban centers, transforming the social and architectural landscape. The impact of these changes was clearly visible in the intensification of commercial activity everywhere. The population's new needs and the concentration of people in cities boosted trade, creating a virtuous cycle of development and innovation. The late Middle Ages thus presents itself as a melting pot of new energies, poised to shape a different future for Europe. Europe after the year 1000, urban rebirth, development of trade and fairs. Urban rebirth emerged as a key and distinctive feature of this historical period. Cities, often inherited from Roman times or born from rural settlements, began to repopulate and expand with astonishing speed. These urban centers quickly assumed the role of vital hubs, catalysts for economic, artisanal, and cultural activity. They became the beating heart of Europe's new dynamics, attracting people and resources. The development of trade was closely and inextricably linked to the growth of these cities. The demands of urban markets and the increased availability of goods stimulated increasingly frequent and complex exchanges. There was a significant intensification of trade routes both by land and sea. Ancient routes were restored and new ones explored, connecting previously isolated regions. These connections weren't limited to individual areas, but linked different European regions in an increasingly dense network. The entire continent began to function as an interconnected system where goods and ideas traveled with increasing ease. The intensification of trade fostered a prodigious exchange of goods, but also, and above all, of ideas and knowledge. The circulation of exotic goods and the encounter of diverse cultures profoundly enriched European society. Fairs, large periodic markets emerged as landmarks in this landscape. They were events of European significance, capable of attracting merchants from far and wide. The function of these fairs went beyond simple buying and selling, becoming important places for meeting and cultural exchange. They contributed significantly to the large scale circulation of goods, facilitating the distribution of rare and precious products. This economic boom spurred the emergence of new professional figures, essential to supporting the complexity of the new trade. Bankers, money changers, and specialized merchants emerged, whose financial and commercial expertise further boosted the economy. The political context of the late Middle Ages was marked by major conflicts and profound institutional transformations. The definition of powers and spheres of influence became a central issue, often the subject of bitter disputes. The most emblematic and enduring conflict of this era was undoubtedly the famous investiture controversy. This dispute pitted two of the greatest authorities of the time against each other, the papacy and the empire. The main point of this bitter dispute was the right to appoint bishops, a prerogative with immense implications. Bishops, in fact, held power that was both spiritual and temporal. They were not only religious leaders, but often also great feudal lords with vast estates and political influence. The investiture controversy continued for centuries, giving rise to famous episodes and significant changes in the relationship between the church and secular power. The resolution of this conflict, although partial, had far reaching consequences. For the empire, the outcome of the dispute led to a progressive weakening of imperial authority. Its claim to control ecclesiastical appointments was scaled back, limiting its scope of action. Conversely, for the papacy, the conflict resulted in a strengthening of papal power, which consolidated its spiritual supremacy and recognized its role as the universal leader of the Church. This conflict contributed decisively to the definition of the complex relationship between Church and state. It laid the foundation for a distinction, albeit a difficult one, between spiritual and temporal power, influencing the political and religious development of Europe for centuries. The Crusades, although primarily conceived as religious wars, had an extremely significant economic impact on Europe. They were military and religious expeditions aimed at liberating the holy places, but their effects went far beyond their initial intentions. The forced and prolonged contact with the East, established during the Crusades, fostered an unexpected expansion of markets. New goods and exotic products began to flow into Europe. This opening led to a greater circulation of previously unknown or rare goods. Spices, fine fabrics, and luxury goods such as silks and perfumes began arriving in abundance in Europe, stimulating demand and enriching trade. The expansion of trade was in turn spurred by the development of new and more efficient trade routes. Italy's maritime cities, in particular, were protagonists of this revolution. The Crusades proved incredibly beneficial for maritime cities like Venice and Genoa. These republics benefited enormously from their connections with the East. Venice and Genoa, thanks to their fleets and mercantile prowess, became leading commercial powers in the Mediterranean. They controlled the routes, goods, and wealth flowing into Europe from the east, building maritime and financial empires that would dominate for centuries. Northern Italy, in particular, was the scene of a peculiar and dynamic political evolution in the late Middle Ages. This region witnessed the emergence of new forms of government that differentiated it from the rest of Europe. Communes, forms of urban self government, arose from the need of cities to assert their political and economic autonomy. These urban agglomerations began to govern themselves autonomously, developing their own laws and institutions. The communes expanded rapidly, not only demographically, but also in their territorial control. They often came into conflict with each other due to disputes over control of territories, resources, and trade routes. Internal and external conflicts were a constant in municipal life, shaping their political identity. Subsequently, many of these municipalities witnessed the establishment of the signori. This transition represented a significant shift in the form of government. The signori were characterized by power concentrated in the hands of a single lord who often assumed control of the city and its surrounding countryside. The origins of these lords varied, they often belonged to local noble families or were military leaders who emerged from conflicts. The transition from communes to signori marked the transition to new forms of government. These new structures were often more stable but less participatory, anticipating models of territorial states. This evolution contributed significantly to the political fragmentation of the Italian peninsula. Instead of unification under a single authority, Italy was characterized by a multitude of regional states, a mosaic of local powers that would interact in a complex balance of alliances and conflicts for centuries to come. The late Middle Ages, therefore, proves to be an era of extraordinary importance, a crossroads of changes that shaped Europe. From economic and urban rebirth to major institutional conflicts, commercial expansion, and new forms of government, this period laid the foundations for the world we know. I hope this exploration has offered you new insights and insights. Thank you for your attention.